Good morning, students. Can you hear me? ठीक है. Hello. শুনা পাইছা নে নাই পোৱা? Hello. Online students, can you hear me? No. Hello. Huna Pale, please say okay. Online students, Huna paisa niki? Hello, students, can you hear me? Okay. Eto recording start korisa nai? Korisa? Okay, we'll start the class. Okay, let's start the class then. So, in the last class we have completed the group called as pteridophytes. So, we'll be starting with the next group, that is Gymnosperms. So, from the Gymnosperm section, what is important, as we have already said, no, it is just two examples that are very important, details about cycus and details about pinus, right. Apart from that, in general, we are going to write the notes, right. So, Gymnosperms will call it the basic points that we need to remember. First, let's start with the plant body. Whenever we talk about the plant body of Gymnosperm is a gametophyte and a sporophyte. It is obviously a sporophyte, no. Next, if you talk about a sporophyte, then obviously it will have proper stems, roots and leaves. Talking about the roots, no, what is the type of roots that we see in case of Gymnosperms? If that is the question, the answer would be confined to two words, either taproot system or adventitious root system, right. So, in case of in case of Gymnosperms, what is the type of root system that we see? Taproot and adventitious, taproot, right. So, certain points. Next, from the root section, we have to talk about certain types of symbiotic association also. We will see certain symbiotic association in the most important examples of Gymnosperm. One is cycus and the other is pinus. So, root section of our question kiya hai, symbiotic association in cycus roots, symbiotic association in pinus roots, two different names. That is the root section. Next is stem. Talking about stem, Generally in case of gymnosperms, we will talk about the stem as something that is woody, right. Generally secondary growth is not present, but in spite of that we will say that the stem is erect and woody. We will be using a word called as perennial also. I think we understand what a perennial is, right. Ebosor ke besi ke thake, dubosor ke besi ke thake, tak ami ki boli kom perennial, right. Next is again branch stem or unbranched stem. Branch stem kot dekha paba, unbranched stem kot dekha paba. Kot dekha paba boli kole again we are concerned with only just two examples, cycas and pinus. In case of pinus, the stem is, have you seen a pinus tree? Pine dekhi sa nahi, right? So pinus stem to branch ne unbranched. Ne pine dekhi so stems dekha nahi. Branch ne unbranched. It branch. Pinus it's branch. Cycas it is unbranched, right? Jeneke roots or we have to compare cycas and pinus. In case of stems also we have to compare cycas and pinus. Next we have to talk about the leaves. Whenever we talk about the leaves of gymnosperm, one word that we remember is needle shaped leaves or needle like leaves, right? Needle like leaves is adaptation for what? Is adaptation for xerophytic plants. Why is a leaf needle shaped? To check the rate of transpiration, etc., right. So in case of gymnosperms, we will see three types of leaves. One type of leaf that is called as a foliage leaf. What is a foliage leaf? The normal that green color leaf that we see, that is called as a foliage leaf. Apart from that, we will see the next type that is called as a needle like leaf, a special leaf, right. In case of, especially the example goes with pine, pinus or pine plant or jumblak leaf or hiblak leaf kenuka hoy, needle shaped, right. And next another word is called as a scaly leaf. Scaly leaf is the third type of a leaf that we see in case of pine, in case of gymnosperms. And whenever we talk about scaly leaf, I think you remember we have talked about scaly leaves before also. What is the characteristic of a scaly leaf? A normal leaf, we can consider it to be as a foliage leaf. Scaly leaf is also a leaf, but what is the difference? The difference is it is non-photosynthetic, right? Normal leaves will have green color, scaly leaves have brown color, right? So it looks like a scale and so it is called as a scaly leaf. The most important point is it's non-photosynthetic, and third, if it is present, it helps in increasing the girth of a stem. If you are talking about a stem like this, on top of the stem if you see scaly leaves, what will the scaly leaves do? First, it will give protection. Second, it will increase the girth of the stem also. Generally, clear picture of this is something that's seen in case of a cycas plant. If you have seen a cycas plant, tolor pine jodi dekhisa, tat kisman scale type bostu ase. That is what is called as a scaly leaf. So roots, stems and leaves we will have to discuss. Next, something about the spores. Again, talking about spores, two words that comes to our mind, homosporous or heterosporous, right? We have talked about homosporous, purely homosporous kun asile? Bryophytes, and in case of pteridophytes, both the conditions are observed, right? Both homosporous and heterosporous. In case of gymnosperms, all are heterosporous. So when we talk about heterosporous, we understand microspores and megaspores. Microspores will give rise to microsporangium and megaspores will give rise to megasporangium, and then we'll have the male gamete and the female gamete. Next is talking about gymnosperms, we have to discuss a structure called as ovule, because it is this group where we will talk about the ovule. Pteridophytes are okay, we have not discussed anything called as ovule. Instead, we have just used a word called as megasporangium. In case of gymnosperms, the megasporangium is called as ovule. For a megasporangium to be called as a ovule, it should have a special characteristic. What is the special characteristic? It should have integuments. An integumented megasporangium is called as ovule. Agote pteridophytes ote hok ba bryophytes ote hok megasporangium ami dekhisilu, but it did not have those integuments, so it was not considered as a ovule. So proper developed ovule is a characteristic of gymnosperms as well as in case of angiosperms. Angiosperms are to ovule dekha po, right? So heterosporous asile. So next, another word that's important in this section is something called as cone. So, what is a cone? Cone is also called as a strawberry. Who forms a cone? Accumulation of certain types of leaves that are called as sporophylls. They will compact together and ultimately they will form a cone. Cones kenuka hobo? Male cone or female cone. Again, we have to talk about two words that is called as monoecious and dioecious. I think we understand monoecious and dioecious, no? Both the sex in the same plant, separate plants, right? So normally all the gymnosperms are dioecious except one example, that is Pinus, that is monoecious. Aru hetu upore question to ahe, no? Every exception is something that we have to read and the question is asked about that exception itself, right? Next is, this was a discussion. Okay, we have to talk about vascular bundles also, because from pteridophytes onwards we know the vascular bundles have started developing. The explanation about vascular bundles is exactly the same that we have discussed in pteridophytes. Pteridophytes ki koisilo vascular bundles present, gymnosperms vascular bundles present. In case of vascular bundle, out of xylem, xylem and phloem, one cell of xylem and one cell of phloem was absent in case of pteridophytes. Exact the same explanation in case of gymnosperms also. So gymnosperms ki nathakibo, if you are talking from the xylem section, xylem or ki nathakibo, vessels nathakibo, and if you are talking about the phloem section, companion cells would be absent, right? Next is talking about vessels also. Normally, gymnosperm or local junto lines, I know, vessels are absent in gymnosperm. This is a common line that we speak about this group. But in spite of that, we have certain exceptions. Then again, questions about the exceptions itself, right? True vessels kisumanor kar thake. As we know, we are talking about the plant group, and these plants or the various groups of plants, they will keep on evolving, and ultimately because of evolution we have got the present day plant, that is the angiosperms. And if you remember, what we said is lower members of each group will have certain similarities with the next group, or higher member of each group will have similarity with the next group of lower members. If you are talking about pteridophytes, pteridophytes are highest group ki asile ferns. If you are talking about the next group after pteridophytes, ki thakibo gymnosperms. Gymnosperms are lowest group, we will be considering it as cycas, right? As of now, because we are concerned with cycas and pinus, so gymnosperms are lowest group boli kole, we will be talking about the cycas plant. Now we have to understand that ferns and cycas will have certain similarities. Fern ki hoy highest of pteridophyte, cycas ki hoy lowest of gymnosperm. Because of evolution, we will see certain similarities which talks about the fact that gymnosperms has evolved from pteridophytes. Kisuman link to ami dekhai pam. Similarly, in case of gymnosperms, the highest group could be considered, or the highest plant could be considered as pinus, because again only the two examples. It is not like this that only pine or pinus is the example of the highest group. There are so many other examples also. Hey order to bahut examples ase. Tar bitor ami specifically ki porim okol pine kotha porim. So if you are talking about the highest gymnosperm and we take the example of a pine, and then we start comparing with the angiosperms, then this pine or this group, not exactly pine, this group of coniferals, if you have heard the word called as coniferals, no? Coniferals are angiosperms or tahator similarity thakibo. What is the similarity? One specific similarity that we are talking about is the presence of vessels. Normally gymnosperms are vessels nathake. You know, higher members of gymnosperms are vessels thake. What does this talk about? It talks about evolution, right? And specific examples, as I said, cycas, pinus to important. Tar upori we have to talk about netum. Netum is very important. Next, aru ketaman ase Texas, netum, etc., etc. The last point about it is something called as, okay, what about the sex organs, Entridium and Archegonium? What we have said about Entridium and Archegonium? That we have seen it developing in the course of evolution. If you are talking about algae, tat ki nasile, Archegonium nasile. It was only Entridium that was present, and from bryophytes onwards, Entridium, Archegonium, both of them were present. In case of pteridophytes also, Entridium and Archegonium was present, but there was certain declination of the cells. And which cells are we talking about? We have seen the declination of the neck canal cells, if you remember. Bryophytes or neck canal cells both asile 6 to 14, 6 to 10, etc. But if you are talking about the neck canal cells in case of pteridophytes, or especially in case of Selaginella, that ki asile it was confined to 1. What would be the next statement? Bahut asile, tapsat eta hol, what next? It should decline, no? So it's almost 0. So in case of Archegonium, Archegonium is present in gymnosperms, but the neck canal cells kiman 0. Talking about the venter also, venter ki thakibo, ventral canal cell and the egg. Again, ventral canal cell, we will be using a word called as ephemeral. What is ephemeral? A short-lived condition is called as ephemeral. So in the entire Archegonium, what is the cell that is important is obviously the egg. So ultimately Archegonium structure to nami ki dekha pam, NCC 0, VCC ephemeral. So what is important is egg. Again, talking about Archegonia, question I have from the point of evolution. What is the last group of plants to have Archegonia? The last group of plants to have Archegonia is Gymnosperms. Again, what is the last group of plants having Entridium? We have to remember Entridium is a structure that would be absent in case of Gymnosperms. So the last group that had Entridium, ki hobo? Pteridophytes, right? So ekita point ami monot rakhim. Entridium started from ki? Algae. continued till ki? Pteridophytes, right? Archegonium started from bryophytes, continued till gymnosperms, but some of the gymnosperms will not show the presence of archegonium. Kisuman exceptions protective point of thakibo. So we'll be writing this note. So this is the content, and after this we have to talk about classification of gymnosperms. Okay, another point. Out of all the groups of plants that we are talking about, starting from algae to angiosperms, suppose the smallest group buli kole, the credit goes to which group? The smallest group of plants. Algae, bryophytes, pteridophytes, gymnosperms, or maybe angiosperms to hoboi nware, because it is the most advanced, it's widely distributed, it cannot be the smallest group. So what is the smallest group? Gymnosperms is the smallest group of plants. There should be certain reasons behind that statement. What is the reason? First, it is very selective, right? Gymnosperm generally, pine hawk, cycas hawk, texas hawk, you will see these plants in which area? Colder regions, right? So they are confined to a particular habitat, particular climatic condition. First is that condition. Second, fertilization and reproduction time is of a long duration. Pollination hobo. Pollination hoar pisote loge loge fertilization hobo ne nohoy. Jedi loge loge fertilization hoy, reproduction rate would be faster. But in case of gymnosperms, especially cycas and pinus we'll be talking about, tahator ki hoy, pollination hoar pisote they have to wait for months for the process of fertilization. So ultimately it slows down the process, and as a result the number of plants gets reduced. That is the second reason. The third reason is maximum of the plants of gymnosperms have become extinct. Right? Ami jete classification pori, we will see that maximum of them have become extinct. Junbilak ase, tahatoru ki hoy, fertilization and reproduction time is of a long duration. As a result, they are confined to just a few number of plants that grows in a specific area, and so this is considered as the smallest group in this entire plant kingdom. Right? So this is the information that we'll write about. Let's write the notes now. Is it understood? So jikhini koisu hekhini hai important. Baki to ami yat bahut kiba kibi likhim, right? Okay, let's start. Okay, gymnosperms of first statement ki naked seeded plants. Eto to janu no? Gymnosperms group of ki boli koi? Seed ase ne nai? Do they fall under spermatophyta? Gymnosperms are included in the group called as spermatophyta, right? Ne wrong? Spermatophyta jodi meaning to najana answer to right wrong to diboi nwara. Spermatophyta meaning ki seed bearing. So gymnosperms and angiosperms are the two groups that are included in spermatophyta, right? But what is the difference? Close seeded, naked seeded. So whenever we talk about gymnosperms, the first statement is they are naked seeded. And why they are naked seeded? Seed cover nai, seed cover kyo nai? Ki nai? Seedor bahir to kune form kore. Seed or bahir to boli kole now don't start talking about the testa and the tegmen. Right? The seed is covered by what? Mango guti to kihere cover hoy thake. Iman scientific na lage. Ami seed or bahirot ki thake? Fruit na thake niki? Fruit to kune form kore? Ovary form kore. So seed or covering na thake means we are talking about that what? The fruit that we eat, no? So jedi hetu na thake, covering na thake mane ki? Ovary na thake. So ovule is present but the ovary is absent. That is the reason why the seeds are exposed, and so we use the word called as naked seeded. In case of angiosperms, we see the ovule that is covered by the ovary, and so it is a closed seed. Right? Yeah, bye, Nico. Okay, as I write down the note, if there is any point that you don't understand, please ask, okay? Phanerogams is the word understood? Phanerogams without ovary likhisu, no? What is a phanerogam? Flowering like aru flower thakile plant dalok ami ki buli kom phanerogam. Is this part over? Nai hoa. Etu line hoisile? Okay, informations, all the informations are important, especially in case of roots, gute gita important. Etur upor to question ahe, etur upor to obviously question ahe, etur upor to question ahe. Because the taproot is something that you need to remember. Corelloid root and mycorrhizal roots, we have discussed it before also, right? Mycorrhiza to we know the association, and BGA also, right? So question ahe, say pinosor root at ki association thake or cycasor root at ki association thake. Next is talking about the stems. They are generally woody, right? What is important? Unbranched stem and branched stem. We have a fossil example of a fossil gymno, that is Welwitschia, right? Welwitschia is a fossil gymnosperm where it is almost absent. Talking about leaves, again what is important? Simple leaves and compound leaves, right? I think you remember the difference between simple and compound leaf, right? Adultery thake, that is called as a simple. Incision, if the incision touches the midrib, then it is called as a compound leaf, right? Simple leaf car, compound leaf car, very important. Next, something called as a sunken stomata. The presence of sunken stomata is a xerophytic adaptation. Generally, gymnosperms kunbilak plant area dekha pao in the colder region or in the hilly areas, right? And these plants are generally considered as xerophytes. Xerophytes mane? What is a xerophyte? The plant that grows in a waterless condition or less scanty water, that is called as a xerophyte, right? No doubt, especially pine kot dekha paisa? Where can you see the pine trees? Tumalake kot dekha paisa? Shillongot dekha paisa? Shillongot pani ase ne nai? But rain to bahut hoy. Then why they are considered as xerophytes? Are you understanding? Junbilak plants, they grow in a waterless condition or less water, no? Those plants are called as xerophytes. We have generally seen the example of pine growing in a huge amount in huge number in places like Shillong, right? Shillong areas by hilly areas, that borokhun nohoy niki. Borokhun to bahut beshi hoy. Tetale kyo xerophyte? Remember a term called as runaway water. Right, we have talked about soil water, no? Capillary water, runaway water. So what is this water considered as? Runaway water, because it slides down, right? Roots bilake lobo nuare, so they ultimately have to grow under less water condition, and so they are called as xerophytes. Now, whenever a plant is a xerophyte, it should have certain types of adaptations. Adaptations against what? Adaptations to check the rate of transpiration, because if a plant will absorb the water and ultimately if it loses all the amount of water that it has absorbed, then it will be a major problem for the plant. So what it has to do is, jiman kini pani absorb korise, it has to retain also, right? I think you are well versed with the word called as transpiration. Transpiration to buzi pao. Transpiration ki hoy? Loss of water in the form of ki? Okol loss of water hole hobo jano? Loss of water to duta ase, eta guttation ase, eta transpiration ase. In the form of water vapor, right? In the form of water vapor, that is transpiration. In the form of water droplets, that is guttation. Okay. So transpiration check koribo lagile tahator eta method ki je they will have stomata, and that a special type of stomata that is called as a sunken stomata. Why is it called as a sunken stomata? Because it sinks down, right? Normally stomata ami kot pao. Stomata is present in which tissue, or it is an example of which tissue system? Tissue system tinta, tissue, epidermal tissue system, ground tissue system or vascular tissue system. Stomata is a part of which tissue system? Stomata is a part of vascular tissue system. Ekdom tolot jay mane goj dal ekdom bhitor khumai thake neki. Yeah. Vascular tissue system to hoboi noare karon vascular tissues kot thake ekdom trunk tor bhitorot, the centermost portion, no? That stomata thakile hitu besara ekoi koribo noribo, right? So stomata is a part of epidermal tissue system. It is always on the epidermis, just upper layer where you see the stomata, right? Normal plants or normal leaves or stomata kot thakibo epidermis of the leaf, right? But in this case, they are present in the epidermis but not superficially. Epidermal cell to okoman bhitorle khumai jabo. For example, if you are talking about a normal plant, if this is the epidermis layer, no, tahantor stomata to kot thakibo here itself, right? Just on the layer, jataniki tahante ki koribo pare with the help of sun rays, transpiration hobo pare. But in case of gymnosperms, if we are talking about this as epidermis, epidermis are tolot cells ase. What will happen is this epidermal tissue will go inside and the stomata will be present here, right? So this part protrudes inside. So this stomata is called as sunken stomata. It is not present directly at the I mean upper part of the leaf. Okoman bhitorle thake. Bhitorle thakile advantage ki the direct sun rays no pore, rate of transpiration would be less. So that is what is called as sunken stomata. What is sunken stomata? You don't have to remember. What you need to remember, sunken stomata is a characteristic of a xerophyte or xerophytic adaptation. Why? To check the rate of transpiration. Talking about leaves, 3 types. Foliage leaf is the normal green leaves that we see. Needle like leaf buli kole pinus we understand. Scaly leaves, the word that is important is non-photosynthetic, it's brown in color. The main function is it protects what? The young leaf and the buds. Aru eta line likhim scaly leaf or scaly leaves are eta point likhiba ha. Next, we'll continue the points. So the plant body is a sporophyte. It will have distinct stem, leaves, and roots. Is the sign over? Next, continue likha. They are mainly, but gymnosperms are mainly ji likha. But majority of the gymnosperms ji likha aru. So majority of them are woody plants, but we have certain exceptions, like we have a climber, we have a shrub also, right? Tallest gymno report question hai, it's also called as the father of the forest. Next, gymnos have limited distribution. We have already talked about it. Limited distribution boli kole what we understand, they are confined to colder regions only, right? So thanda jagat hai poa jai. Next, talking about vascular system, xylem, phloem we understand, but this is a point that is important, exceptions. If vessels are present in netum, then netum is an example of a lower gymnosperm or higher gymnosperm. Higher gymnosperms, because it will have certain similarities with angiosperms also, right? Next, likhiye ba life cycle of gymnosperms. If this is over, is this over? Exceptions के लिए होल. এটা বস্তু লিখাচোন. think this is understood. Bryophytes onwards আমি এইবিলাক কথা কৈ আছো. Answer to the last pointer. Baki ekini to we understand no? Gymnosperms of ovule is a structure that we'll see. We have already said about that. Ekini puchi paisu. Cone we understand. Sporophylls or combination. 2 cones, male cone and female cone. We have exceptions for Cycas and Pinus. We'll talk about it later. Male cone microsporangiate, female cone megasporangiate. What is the meaning? Megaspores will be formed and microspores will be formed inside. Talking about the germination of spore. কি হবো endosporic germination of spore ne exosporic it will be endosporic ne exosporic what about the rest of the students endosporic ne exosporic answer to kihor basis of dibo libo seed form hoy ne nohoy in gymnosperms can we see the seed formation obviously we can see seed formation for seed to form what is the type of germination we should have in case of spores endosporic ne exosporic in the plant body ne away from the plant body in the plant body last class we have talked about it no so if you remember the line called as seed habit started developing in the group called as pteridophytes and we have talked about Archegonium and Sylvania right so germination of spore is endosporic. Is this part over? Please read this portion from the notes first, okay? NCERT book khonor pora noporiba. Prothome notes poriba, tar pisot NCERT book poriba. Karon yate tumar clearly dia ase. chart kon okman dekho mane ki you have to write it like this, then we'll have to show the fertilization also. Okay. Understood? Chart kon buji paisu? After fertilization, they will form the zygote. The zygote would form the embryo. Embryo would convert itself into a seed. Seed would germinate into the baby plant, that is the sporophyte. Right? Now, if the chart is over, what about the ploidy? You know, ploidy bilak likha asu. Starting from sporophyte. Sporophyte or ploidy to moi likhiye disu. Baki bilak ploidy likha. Is it over? Holy. So I think it's understood because ekini words to ami plant kingdom of porhi ahiso sporophyte, megaspores, microspores, megasporophyll, microsporophyll, etc., right? But there are certain points that are important from gymnosperms part. Important points ki? Moi jungita tick korisu hekita important. Karon baki khini to common hoy, ekhini ami pteridophytes aru dekha paisu, right? What is important? Pollen grains. Pollen grains pteridophyte are present and absent. Absent. Where is it present? Gymnos and angioles, right? Okay. Talking about this male gametophyte, normally in case of bryophytes and pteridophytes, we have seen the development of male gametophyte. Male gametophyte or ki thake? Sex organs thake. What is the sex organ or the male sex organ? It's called as entridium. Is the male sex organ present in case of gymnosperms? Entridium dekhisu niki kobat? Nai dekha? So what is the point that is important? Yes? So whenever we talk about gametophyte, that sex organs thakibo Enteridium and Archegonium. Enteridium absent, Archegonium present, absent. Archegonium is present. Okay, this is another important point, right? But certain examples of Gymnosperms, Archegonia nathake as the evolution continues, right? Okay, that was the first point. Second point, in case of the female gametophyte, megaspores, we understand megaspores will germinate to form the female gametophyte. Female gametophyte in case of Gymnosperms is also called as endosperm, right? So endosperm is a word that you have already studied or you have an idea about endosperm. Endosperm boli kole, what normally Gymnosperms point of view you don't have to say. Whenever we use the word endosperm, we generally remember a statement saying that it is the product of double fertilization. First point. Second endosperm or sentence that, so Gymnosperms porhi asu karone endosperm word to we observe, so we are talking about it. Normally if you don't talk about Gymnosperms, whenever we hear the word endosperm, what are the points that you remember? The first point, as I said, it is the product of double fertilization. Second, it is the chief characteristic or unique characteristic of angiosperms, right? So these are the 2 points. Double fertilization ki asile? Remember the 2 male gametes that was present in the pollen grain or in the pollen tube. One gamete will fuse with the egg and the other will fuse with the central cell, and ultimately central cell fuse kori pale tahante ki form koribo, a cell called as PEN or primary endosperm nucleus, and that cell will convert itself into the endosperm, right? So endosperm or ploidy ki asile in case of Gymnosperms? Sorry, in case of angiosperms? It was trisane, right? So the third statement regarding endosperm is triploid tissues. Double fertilization of product, unique characteristic of angiosperms, triploid in nature. And fourth is obviously nutritive, right? A whole side point. So and the question is endosperm present in Gymnosperms? Yes, endosperm is present in Gymnosperm. Next question, endosperm or ploidy ki in case of Gymnosperm? Angiosperms or ki asile? Trisane. Gymnosperms or ki hobo? N kya hobo? Rest of the students? Yeah, it will be N, I know. Next, N kya hobo? Karan so endosperm to kihere form korise? Megaspores or ploidy ki? Spores or ploidy ki? Spores is always N, right? If something is formed from N, the endosperm ki hobo? N. Tat ki asle? Trisane, yate ki? N. Next, endosperm in case of angiosperms, before fertilization or after fertilization? After fertilization, yate before ne after? It is before fertilization. These are the points that you have to remember. So endosperm boli kole, it is present in angiosperms. It's also seen in case of Gymnosperms. But what is the difference? One before fertilization, the other after fertilization. One is haploid, the other is triploid, right? Third question, female gametophyte in case of Gymnosperms is called as, female gametophyte in case of Gymnosperms is called as endosperm. In the endosperm, what you will see is the female sex organ. Endosperm would be a group of tissues. Hey, group of tissues or ki thakibo? Sex organ to thakibo, that is called as Archegonia. Inside the Archegonia, ki dekha paba egg, and so egg is called the female gametophyte, and then the process continues, right? Another word that is associated in case of Gymnosperms is something called as polyembryony. Heard about this word? Polyembryony. Embryo form hoise nai? Hoise? Keita embryo form korise? Eta? Bahut embryo form korile tak ami ki boli kom? Polyembryony. So polyembryony is a characteristic that is seen in case of Gymnosperms. Now, for polyembryony to occur, what should be the condition? Criteria ki hobo laibo polyembryony develop koribole? Embryo develop koribo lagile. Eta embryo develop korise no? Eta embryo keneke develop korise? Male female gamete fuse together and ultimately they form an embryo. Many embryo form koribo lagile ki hobo laibo? Kisman belek characteristics thakibo laibo. We'll be talking about polyembryony in details, but the basic point is there should be more than one egg, right? So Archegonia thakibo. To have more than one egg, you should have more than one Archegonia also. So in case of Gymnosperms, the endosperm has more than one Archegonia. Inside the Archegonia, we have eggs. So more than one egg will fertilize, that will result in the development of more than one embryo, and so this is what is called as polyembryony. Right? Bahut kita Archegonia ekini tissues thakibo, bahut kita Archegonia bhitor eta egg thakibo, gutei kita jodi fertilize kore tetale eta embryo form koribo nokore. So ultimately the concept of polyembryony. Okay, so we'll write those now. Is this over? Hogan? Okay, I was talking about the ploidy. Ploidy kini likhi dibo libo ne pariba? What is the ploidy of the male cone? Twice n, twice n, twice n, n. Right? Next, twice n, twice n, twice n, n. Twice n, twice n, twice n. Jihetu, in the life cycle, what we have seen is both the diploid phase and the haploid phase. Dekha paisilu nai? Ei matro jonto life cycle akisu, ta diploid phase or haploid phase dekha paisu nai? Yes, some of the stages were haploid and some of the stages were diploid. Instead of using the word haploid and diploid, we can use the word gametophyte and sporophyte also. So both gametophytic generation and sporophytic generation was observed here. Now, since if you see two types of generation, then we have to talk about the relation also. I mean, bryophytes onwards, statement eta koi aise na, fully dependent, totally independent, partially dependent, etc., etc. So in case of gymnosperms also, we see both the conditions. So we have to know the relation also. What is the relation? Dependent? No, not dependent. Dependent? No, not dependent. So eta kam kora some points puli likha. কি হবো ডিপেন্ডেন্ট নে নট ডিপেন্ডেন্ট ফুললি ডিপেন্ডেন্ট কাৰণ গেমেটোফাইটটো ক'ত আছিলে মেইন প্ল্যান্ট বডিত আছিলে Okay, talking about this point first. This one we understood. Points about male gametophyte. The male gametophyte in case of gymnosperms is also called as. The female gametophyte in gymnosperms is also called as endosperm. The male gametophyte in gymnosperms is also called as pollen grains. If it is a pollen grain, so inside the pollen grain obviously male gametes would be present. What is the number of male gametes in case of angiosperms? Duta, right? So in case of gymnosperms also there are two, but sometimes one becomes non-functional, right? Because gradual evolution hai, we will see all those things. Next is, we have written a word called as the male gametophyte is reduced. What we understand by that statement? Reduced mane, we are talking about the reduction of the cells. Why? If you remember, whenever we talk about the male gametophyte, no, we remember something called as enteridium, and whenever we talk about enteridium, we remember that group of cells having the jacket layer, the androcytes, etc., etc. Kintu etia ki hol, it became a reduced structure, number of cells decreased, and ultimately we have one cell structure that is called as a pollen grain. So reduction of the sex organs is observed from which group of plants? Reduction of the sex organs is observed from which group of plants? From Gymnosperms. Right, reduction of the sex organs, generally highest reduction of sex organ ko dekha pao in angiosperms, where both enteridium and archegonium, both of them are absent. But in this case, it's only enteridium that is absent, but archegonia to present hoy. Right, so male gametophyte is reduced, it is represented by pollen grain, and it has to get egita word mon rakhiba, a reduced word to mon rakhiba. Okay. Gametophyte reduced, now you had understood the meaning. So gametophyte reduced condition to ami code dekha pam gymnosperms aru angiosperms dekha pam, right, because it is represented by the that egg and ultimately or the ovule ba ovaries and the pollen grain. That's an example of a reduced gametophyte. Next, if the question is asked, fully developed gametophyte is a characteristic of which group of plant? But gametophyte is the most dominant phase in which group of plants? Bryophytes. Mujhe paisa nahi, karon bryophytes ote arambho hoisile no, enteridium, archegonium, bhalke, all the structures. So fully developed are most dominant in case of bryophytes, because the entire plant body itself was a gametophyte in case of a bryophyte, right? Reduction code dekha paise gymnosperms or angiosperms. Okay. Next, we have to write something about the female gametophyte. Remember this word judeogamy. Fertilization duta type no, eta hol judeogamy, eta hol siphonogamy, right? Judeogamy is a characteristic of lower plants. Judeogamy means something that has a relation with animal like character, or it has an animal like character. And which character are we talking about? Motile male gametes. Male gametes, right, are motile in case of angiosperms. Okay, let's talk about angiosperms directly. In case of angiosperms, male gametes bilak motile and non-motile. Non-motile male gametes kot thake, pollen grain of bhitor thake. It's not like that the male gametes will come out and they will go for fertilization all by themselves. Teneka to no hoy, right? But in case of other examples like bryophytes and pteridophytes, what we have seen, Entridium asile, entridium or inside male gametes were formed, male gametes were dispersed or they get liberated in water, they swim towards the female gamete. So to swim towards the female gamete, obviously they should be motile, right? So having motile male gametes is a characteristic of lower plants, and that process is called as ki judeogamy. So gymnosperms ki hoy? Gymnosperms are considered as slightly advanced plants. Tar agoloke junto group asile pteridophytes are male gametes motile and non-motile. Motile. So the next group of gymnosperms, or if you talk about the lower gymnosperms, they will have certain similarities with the pteridophytes also. So lower gymnosperms or ki thakibo kisuman examples or they will have motile male gametes, and so that process of fertilization is called as ki judeogamy. So what is the fern-like character that you see in cycas? Question to enege direct to nahe no ketiyao. What is the fern-like character that you see in cycas? Fern ki asile pteridophytes are highest two. Cycas ki considered as one of the lowest gymnosperm. They will have certain similarities. One character is motile male gametes, right? The fern-like characteristic, ferns are to ki asile motile male gametes asile, cycas are to ki ase motile male gametes asile. Or apart from that, it will cycas, we will discuss later. Cycas or ki thakibo gutekhini fern-like characters thakibo. Gutekhini fern-like characters mane you have to talk about rhizome, you have to talk about frond, you have to talk about ramenta, you have to talk about that coiling, right? Egita points together with that male gametes. Gutekhini jodi thake tetiahe plant dalok ami ki buli kau, that plant is considered as a fern, right? So cycas also has certain fern-like characteristics. understood. So, a type of fertilization where the male gametes are carried with the help of a pollen tube is called as siphonogamy. The pollen tubes looks like a siphon, and so the word has been included, right? Siphon mane ki, a tube like structure, that is what is called as a siphon. A hollow tube like structure, tak ami ki boli kon siphon. So, pollen tube to kenuka, it's a long tube like structure that is hollow, and so that type of fertilization is called as siphonogamy. Next point, siphonogamy is a characteristic of higher plants, not only in case of higher gymnosperms but also a characteristic of angiosperms. Right. Next, we have to write certain points about the ovule. Since ovule is a well developed structure, in case of gymnosperms, ovule to kisman points likhibo lagibo. Okay. Now, since ovule is a structure that is seen both in case of gymnosperms and also in case of angiosperms, we have to compare. Jeneke endosperm compare korisilu no, ovule compare koribo lagibo. Ovule present in both, right? What is it is also called as ki megasporangium buliu kobo pare, but integumented megasporangium, that would be the proper word, because if it has integuments only then it is called as ovule. Next, ovule too. Megasporangium or majo mane it's a megasporangium tar jodi integuments thake tel tak entire structure to ami ovule buli kom, right? Next, majority of the ovules are autotropous. That is also one important point. Autotropous ovules, angiosperms, if you have studied, or sexual reproduction in flowering plants jodi okoman porisa, types of ovules you need to study. There are around 6 types of ovules depending on the orientation, right? Ovule bili kole you have to remember the parts. I think you have heard of words called as micropyle, selagia, right? Hilum, raphe, funicle, ebilak words ase, thik ase. So the stalk of the ovule is called as ki funicle, right? So whenever you talk about the ovule, it has a stalk. This is called as the funicle. Talking about the orientation of the funicle, funicle dal keneke move korise, what is the position of the micropyle, the selagia and the funicle, right? Angles out ase ne straight out ase. According to that, we have 6 types of ovules that we will be studying in that chapter. As of now, we have a word that is called as autotrophs. Angiosperms or junkhini ovule hoy, tahatar majority of the ovules are anatropous. Yate ki autotrophs. What is the autotrophous ovule? It is also called as a straight ovule. Talking about ovule, normally ami keneke akko ovule to, if you are talking about ovule like this, something like this. In case of angiosperms, angiosperms boli keneke gom palu karon dukhon integuments ase, right? So we will be using a word called as bitegmic in case of angiosperms. We are using a word unitegmic in case of gymnosperms, right? So bitegmic ovule is a characteristic of, it's a characteristic of angiosperms. Unitegmic is a characteristic of gymnosperms. So etu jodi ovule hoy, egita integuments hol, etu to embryo sac ba yate egg apparatus and antipodal cell, central cell, etc., etc. Eta log ki kom funicle. Remember a word called as micropyle? Micropyle kunkhini, right? It is that area which is not covered by the integuments, and the opposite to that is selagia. Ei tinta bostu micropyle, selagia or funicle, if they lie in the straight line, they are called as straight ovule, or it is called as autotrophous. Angiosperms are ki dekho anatropous, which is also called as inverted. Inverted hobo lagile ki hobo lagbo, you have this integument, this one, this one. Eta log ki boli kom funicle, and then with these two are integuments. This is the embryo sac or whatever you say. This is the micropyle, this is the selagia, right? Etu hol inverted in case of angio, etu hol straight in case of gymno. Up till now, I think this much information is enough. Details about it in the next chapter, right? Sexual reproduction in flowering plants or tami kom. So ekhini hol next this point. The main body of ovule is made up of, again this is a line that is related with that chapter. Sexual reproduction of hair, details about the ovule formation, who forms the ovule, details tat he dia ase. Yate just okoman dise, so it's a bit confusing because we have not read that chapter, right? After we read that chapter, this point will become clear. We have to know ovule to kune form korise, right? We have something called as a nucellus. What is nucellus? Ovulor jeti ami structure of a ovule akim no, ovule akute ami ki korim enuka eta embryo sac dim. Next is we'll draw something like this, nucellus, tar uport ami integuments akim, tar pisot ami funicle akim, thik ase. Ei gutei khini ovule to kune form korise, eibilak je cells no, ei cells or eta cell dangor hoi pelai ovule to form korise, right? A cells bilak ki hoy nucellus. So who forms the ovule? The nucellar tissues forms the ovule, right? Ebilak bostu ami kenege porim jana. If you have heard the word called as megasporogenesis, microsporogenesis, no, ebilak process ami jetia porim, at that time we'll be talking about how is that megaspore formed, right? Megaspore coat form kore, kune form kore, nucellus role ki, right? As of now, just remember this, right? So nucellus e kune ki form kore, ovule to form kore, nucellar tissues or ploidy ki man etu kotha ahe, it is always diploid, right? And what is the function of the nucellar tissues? So prothomote etu ovule to nasile no, prothomote gutei cells bilak asile, right? Cells bilakor out of this entire cells only one cell became enlarged, remaining cells bilak to asile, right? A remaining cells bilakor what is the function? They will supply the food to the developing ovule, right? So ultimately at the end of the process, etu jetia fully matured hoi jabo, tetia ki hobo, ei cells bilak naikia hoi jabo, right? So generally nucellus is something that is not seen after fertilization or during the process, right? Nucellar tissues bor naikia hoi jay, especially in a seed. Nucellar tissues ami dekha karon ei structure to etu seed form koribo no, ablux of testa, tegment and all this, and this will form the seed. So in case of a seed, is the nucellar tissues observed? No, nucellar tissues na thake. But have you heard something called as perispermic seed? Sob pahori thakilu no, perispermic morphology ma koisu certain seeds that contains the nucellus in spite after seed formation also retaining the nucellus. Normally seeds bilakor nucellus nathake, kisuman seeds or nucellus to persist kore, persistent nucellus, that seed is called as ki perispermic. Rest of the cases the nucellus disappears. Some cases the seed would be formed and together with that certain tissues of the nucellus could also be seen. That type of a seed is called as perispermic seed, right? এইবিলাক পাহৰিলে আৰু কি কৰিম আৰু ন we'll just write one chart ঠিক আছে যেহেতু নিউক্লিয়াছৰ কথা কৈছো we are not going to wind up now wait okay লিখাছোন এইটো The pen is also revolting. Taru likhibo mon nai aru. Tumalkor nisna. I swear, eta pen chahi nai. You all are so happy for that, no? Kintu moi to likhib. I will write it down. I swear. Next class hole enake likhi thoi dia this chart is not complete we don't have time we don't have ink also right and you don't have patience also so iman bostu jeta negative there is no point of continuing so what we'll do is we'll stop the chart here right ekhini portion of prop we'll study in the next class right A2 point understood right similar with angiosperms also so functional megaspore ki hole convert kore we'll talk about it in the next class okay thank you